Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Selling at the Edge with HPE. I'm your host, Katie Bavoso from the Channel Company. This is part 2 of our edge computing discussion with HPE and Intel. In part 1, we got to know the edge and the value it presents. Today in part 2, we will discuss sales opportunities at the edge and how you can maximize your revenue in this space. Research suggests more and more companies will shift away from the cloud and data centers to analyze, process, and store their data at the edge. By 2025, experts predict 75% of enterprise-generated data will be processed at the edge. Now is the time to break into this evolving market space, and HPE and Intel can show you how. Joining me now to discuss this are Dennis Vilfort, Director of Edge Computing at HPE, and Tanya Pelletier, Multi-Industry Global Acceleration Director at Intel. Welcome to both of you. Let's get started with segment 1, Defining the Edge. So Dennis, you're going to kick us off. The last time you and I spoke, we spent plenty of time talking about what the edge is. So let's just do a quick refresher. What is the edge and what can we do with that data to optimize operations?
Yeah, Katie, thank you. And great to be back here with you again. And let me tell you, Edge is blowing up all over the place. It's a good thing. It's a fantastic, exciting time to sell to companies and help them be outfitted with IT everywhere. So to answer your question, what is the Edge? The Edge is we use computers now outside the data center. We use them everywhere. We use them in cars. We use them in trucks. We use them in candy stores. We use them in restaurants. We use them in oil platforms. It's all the places where you're now seeing computers being part of human activity. And the reason for that, of course, is, as you just alluded to, more and more data is being generated sort of as digital exhaust for what we do when we do things. And human beings, since we're close to 8 billion on the planet, we are distributed in nature. So therefore, we got to get computing out to where the activity takes place. That's edge computing. It's the opposite of centralized computing. It's decentralized.
A great explanation, Dennis. Thank you. You've actually got the second question to continue to catch us up here. Many businesses still store and process data in the data center or the cloud. Why should they consider edge computing, especially considering the events of the last nearly 2 years?
Yeah, you're asking a very good question. Why do we even have to bother with this edge computing? Now we have a lovely data center, or we went to maybe a cloud-first strategy. Why can't we just keep doing that? And in fact, many of the workloads that people have centralized are great workloads for centralized applications, such as accounts payable, accounts receivable, things like if you have a new banking application that everybody needs to access from their smartphone, then you put it up on, let's say, Amazon Cloud, or it could be a Microsoft Azure Cloud. It doesn't really matter who the cloud provider is, but that's because we're dealing in human time. What we're talking about now is we're talking about dealing in machine time. And machine time is actually microseconds, something that we humans don't really feel comfortable with because we do things in seconds or minutes. If you have seconds or minutes to spare, you should use a centralized paradigm because the network's latencies are so good now that you can actually start videos and stuff like that. That's a whole notion that nobody goes to the video store anymore, right? Because you can stream the data to you when you're good and ready and your popcorn is hot. But that's not what we're talking about at the edge. At the edge is the opposite. Here we actually are looking at hundreds of megabytes that have to be processed inside half a second, a quarter of a second. That's like 250 milliseconds, right? And decisions have to be sometimes made in microseconds worth of delay. So this is what we call decision latency. Decision latency means, hey, you know what? I don't have time to move all my data to the central data center or to the cloud, because by the time I do that, the opportunity for me to react to that data has passed. I'll give you an example. If you're a supermarket, for example, you've seen these checkout counters that we all get to check out our own groceries, and thank goodness most of us are honest people. But it turns out there's a few folks that they try to cheat the system, and a nice expensive bottle of whiskey or wine gets scanned like it was a chewing gum, right? And then that's a loss to the company. So how do you stop that problem from happening? Well, check this out. Instead of having people standing there looking over your shoulder, well, that sort of defeats the purpose of self-checkout, right? So what we have instead is cameras that recognize not normal behavior. And you can cross-pollinate that with what's going on with your point of sale system. Now, why is that necessary? Well, because we want to cut down on people who are not honest, okay? We want to cut down on people who are stealing. So notice though, if I am a thief and I'm stealing something from a store, from the moment I have done my dark deed to the moment I'm out the door, we're talking seconds. So if I have to send 4 or 5 camera feeds up to the cloud, the thief is long gone. I don't have time to do that. So that gives me that example of very compressed time period for me to react and lots of data, typically from cameras. So this is why we need computing, not in the cloud, but out in the store where it can do the most good.
Thanks so much, Dennis. That brings us into segment 2, selling differently at the edge. And Tanya, this is where we get you involved in the conversation. As Dennis explained, data is moving away from the data center. At the same time, decisions about the data infrastructure are also increasingly moving away from it. How do you identify opportunities outside of the data center?
I don't actually think it's about where to look for opportunities outside of the data center. But really, every single one of our customers needs to be considering their digital transformation journey. That journey and the era of edge compute is naturally driving this convergence between IT and OT, that operational technology discussion. So I think our responsibility is to really walk that journey with our partners and our customers. We cannot define the future state piece by piece, but really we need to be aligning long-term technology roadmaps, business needs, corporate strategies, industry and technology advancements to reach that future state.
Absolutely. Dennis, you've got the second question here. How do you recommend engaging customers? Are there tools that you use to broaden your customer scope?
Here's the deal. We're dealing with different class of customers at the edge because we're dealing with folks that are running a factory, running a store, running an oil platform. These are people who have things to do. They have jobs to be done. So we need to engage with them differently than the way we used to engage with the customer that was an IT professional in the data center. We're very used to that. Most of us, our partners, HPE sales folks and so on, we're used to talking speeds and feeds. But speeds and feeds in the data center, which might make some sense, is not making any sense at all when you're talking to a line of business operator in a edge location. So we're talking to a distributed enterprise that has maybe they're manufacturers and they're doing, they have 360 factory locations worldwide. That plant operator, he cares about one thing only. How can I run my plant more securely? How can I create more widgets? And how can I catch things like bad quality? If you look at many things today in manufacturing, it is actually multi-step processes. You want to control each process. You want to Q&A, quality assurance, at each step, so that if something goes bump in the night or we're not within spec in a sub-assembly, we can stop that right there and then before it cascades down the line and cause real trouble. So if you're talking to a customer who has that problem, that is what you should discuss. And what it is really a data footprint at each step. So here's my advice. Follow the data. Don't talk about your box or your server or your storage array. Those are incidental building blocks that is needed, but that's part of the solution. Let's first get our hands around the problem by understanding what is it that's causing you the grief? Why are you losing sleep at night? Is that because when all of a sudden the candy bars are not up to spec in terms of how much caramel, how much chocolate, you have to 86 and entire days of production because you did not catch it early on. So that is what we need to have a conversation with our customers. A business problem that needs to be solved and how we then can apply technology and understand the data flow that follows the business flow. And I'm finding that whenever I talk to customers about their process, right? What happens? Raw sugar comes in, okay, it turns into caramel. Then what happens? It gets squirted into some candy bars. Once you understand that, the customer actually opens up. And what you then can spy for and identify is data processing opportunities at every step. So you become a trusted advisor very quickly once you sit down and have this discussion with a customer.
Tanya, back over to you. We've heard a lot about the why and the how of edge computing, but how can HPE and Intel help partners implement edge computing?
Well, I think Dennis read my mind actually in his answer. Again, it comes back to walking that journey with them and staying engaged all the way through. We use a framework called ADS, which stands for Assess, Discover, Design, and Scale. And as Dennis mentioned, right, it's really a trusted advisor methodology, which is built around a few key principles. We have to assess where they are in their journey and what they're solving for at the enterprise level. We need to identify and qualify possible opportunities in IT and the 4Ps areas. So how will a customer transform all aspects of business value in the way that they manage their people, including employees, partners, customers, and vendors, their physical premises, their processes, and their product or service? And ultimately, as Dennis mentioned, right, the needs of the business should drive that technology transformation.
And that brings us into segment 3, scaling at the edge. Dennis, one of the greatest challenges of selling at the edge is that projects start small, but many may not realize these projects can scale. Can you offer some advice on how to best prepare for and manage that change in scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, as Tanya mentioned also, being the trusted advisor, that actually means monetizing your solution. And that sounds fancy, right? But what it really means is, hey, we can identify, let's take that manufacturing example. Let's say you are creating $1 million worth of finished goods per month for a given manufacturing location. And let's say the solution that we're now putting in by putting quality assurance at each step can increase my output by 20%. So now we can monetize, right? Now we can put dollars and cents on the outcome of the solution that we are in now learning the customer needs. Okay, now what is 20% out of $1 million? Well, that's 200,000. So that may not sound like a lot, right? And it may sound like, well, there's going to be a pilot program. There's going to be a lot of complexity we need to sort out. But remember, this customer might actually have 1,000 locations worldwide. So think about this for a minute. So you take 200,000 and you multiply that by 1,000. Now you're talking $200 million. So one of the things that is very, very, very key to understand a distributed enterprise is there's not just one location. It might be the pilot. It might only be a $50,000 solution to get to the 200,000, right? Otherwise, if it was a $500,000 solution to get to 200,000, we'll be upside down in the deal, right? So clearly, so many salespeople fall into the trap of saying, 50K, yeah, is it worth my while to go and do that? It's just a bunch of servers and whatnot and some software. It's like, maybe I shouldn't prioritize it so high. And the answer is, don't trip over cents towards the dollars, right? Because if the customer, if you've done your assessment correctly from a seller's perspective, and you realize, well, this customer has 1,000 locations worldwide, you know already there's a multiplication factor here. That for every cent, for every dollar, every time we make him $1, it's $1,000. And going through that with a customer and painting that picture that this is big money we're talking about, that actually gives you air cover. And here's the best part. You are now designed into the way the customer operates his or her business. And when you do that, you are more of an OEM partner. You're not going to do 1,000 locations globally overnight, right? That's going to be rolled out in phases. So from a pipeline management standpoint, as a seller, you actually have line of sight now to next quarter, because this is a gift that keeps giving. Just because you actually locked and loaded on a 50K proof of concept pilot. The pilot, once that's locked and loaded there, this is going to be, oh yeah, you can make your goals month after month after month, quarter after quarter after quarter. So you really can manage a pipeline, and the customer is willing to be there with you because you have shown there's a multiplication benefit across all locations with this sort of an edge-in solution.
Tanya, let's build on that because as Dennis says, don't trip over cents on your way to dollars. So we know that end user customers also face scaling challenges from a cost perspective. Is there anything that HPE and Intel can do to help organizations scale financially and from a deployment perspective?
I think Dennis very accurately described transformational engagements. But I mean, business models are constantly refreshing and reinventing for the needs of the time. I mean, we see more and more adaptation of how we structure the business. We're seeing emerging approaches around technology as a service, similar to a leasing model. So reducing the burden of CapEx to an OpEx model. Service business models are poised for growth because companies want outcomes, not ownership. And really, ROI is really no longer tied to ownership. And then I think there's the coalition approach where there are partnerships established with 3 or more companies working together to create a range of services that none of them could have offered alone. These coalitions, again, they're coming back to the needs of the business. They're understanding the industry challenges defined by end users and then translating them into opportunities and answers with partners. And obviously Intel and HPE, are right in the mix of that, part of partnering together. And that type of partnership approach can really drive scalability in real solutions being deployed, moving beyond those small proof of concepts.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in here, Katie, and also say,
Please.
You can imagine a customer. I used the example we just discussed with 1,000 locations, and they might say, "Well, I don't have the money to purchase and operate. I don't have the talent. I don't have the money. What am I going to do? I hear what you're saying. You can create a better outcome for my factory, but I have not budgeted or hired people who can manage this stuff for me." So what Tanya is pointing at here is exactly right. We're seeing that people want the outcome, the utility of the solution, but they don't want to jump back into having to hire an army of IT folk and have a budget item set aside. What you can do, and that's what we have, of course, at HPE, we together with Intel, we are deploying every month more and more GreenLake solutions. So our way to solve this problem at HPE is GreenLake everywhere. Because here's the value proposition to the customer. When the customer says, "Oh, I get it. I can save millions of dollars or make millions of dollars across all the 1,000 locations, but I don't have a nickel. Okay, how am I going to do this?" The answer is, it's not going to cost you anything, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, because we are going to do it for free. And that's when the customer, falls in a debt faint and you have to scrape him or her off the floor. No, they're actually going to say, "What? For free? Come on. I'm not born yesterday. I'm running a business. You're running a business. I'm pretty certain you can't do this for free." We said, no, I'm not going to say it's going to be free forever. It's going to instead be a usage charge. So when you look good, we look good. It's not like the Vidal Sassoon of selling, right? You end up with this notion that you're helping the customer running his or her operation more efficiently or grabbing new business opportunities. And for that privilege, we will then give you a little GreenLake tax, but you don't have to pay any upfront cost because we structure the contract so that you pay for the utility of the gear. You don't have to own the gear. So what Tanya said, ownership to utility, spot on. GreenLake all the way.
And with that said, Tanya, why should partners go on this edge journey with HPE and Intel? And additionally, how does your partnership make this more valuable for channel partners?
Well, I think for several years now, we've been very vocal about the importance of our partners. We often use the phrase orchestrate the ecosystem. And that's really what we're here to do. We've curated an incredible portfolio of partner solutions. We have over, I think, 500 market ready qualified, meaning that they've already been deployed and are in market today. And a lot of those run on HPE. When we go back to our efforts around consultative engagements with the end users and our vertical industries focus, it's pulling our partners together that will be the answers that we present to enterprise level digital transformation. We cannot answer that alone. We will always be better together.
Better together. Very well put. Dennis, would you like to build on that from an HPE perspective?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, right? We've had great relationship with Intel for quite a long time, frankly. And you can argue all the way back to the compact days, right? We took Intel processors and slapped a motherboard and power supply and disk drives and sheet metal around it, right? And that additional integration, a processor by itself, right, is not really so exciting unless it's part of a system. So together we make these systems. And what we're finding now is building a system is considered well understood. So you're not getting the notion anymore where it's black magic putting a server together. What is becoming magical to customers is the notion that I can do things with it. I actually personally believe we're in sort of like the third renaissance of of computing, because everyone today grew up with computers, right? We walk around with supercomputers in our pocket. The fact that Intel is there with ever increasing computers, ever increasing firepower, that's taken for granted. But frankly, because we're building systems together that can be deployed now at the edge, just to give you an idea, over the 20 years, right? Over the last 20 years, thanks to Moore's Law, which I would say Intel is the keeper of to a very large extent, right? Moore's Law has now given us machines that are 10,000 times more powerful for the same dollar. So thank you, Intel, right? And you can also thank HPE that we actually made systems out of that. So, but the point really is, you can take a whole data, what used to be a whole football field sized data center, shrink it down and put it out at the edge where it does the most good. And that's the combined efforts of Intel and HPE.
So before we leave today, I have to ask, what are the 3 biggest takeaways that viewers should leave with today? Dennis, let's start with you.
Yeah, 3 biggest things. Well, we're not in the data center any longer, and cloud first is not the panacea that it was. Now we got to go edge first. And how do you do that? You understand the flow of the customer's data. Have a data flow conversation. Once you understand that, you know the digital footprint of the customer's operation, and you'll see tons of opportunities. And then I'll say the second thing is that, of course, Intel and HPE, we're here to help. And we have the right systems that can go anywhere you want. And so we are the cloud that comes to you, especially with GreenLake, right? And then finally, as sort of a little, here's something for you to want, if you want to read something. I found a recent book, particularly good, about reframing our thinking away from focusing on the technology to instead having conversation around the job that needs to be done. And the book is Gap Selling by Keenan. And it's basically gap selling, getting the customer to yes. And that's what we want here. We want the customer to say, yes, I know you can help me with my problems. I know we can build an edge-in strategy, and let's do it.
Let's do it. And Tanya, what would be the 3 biggest takeaways that you want the viewers to leave with today?
First of all, that I'm sold. Dennis sold me. But in seriousness, the process of integrating digital technology into areas of a business, resulting in a transformation of both business operations and business culture norms, is the next imperative. Actually, it's critical now. I would say number 2, step back, seek to fully understand the business needs at the enterprise level before dropping into a widget sales mentality, back to Dennis's comment, right? We have to be strategic consultants. And number 3, keep customers at the center. What are the outcomes that we're driving to? This is the future of how technology is going to be consumed.
100%, the now and the future. So very good point there, Tanya. My last question today would be, if there's anywhere that viewers can turn to learn more, where would you turn them to? So Dennis, would you like to tell us where your sources to turn to would be?
Yeah, HPE.com. And I especially would like to and it should be, we should have it on the screen right now. There's a Doppler report that we just published a month or so ago, and it has nothing but edge. It's talking about edge. A lot of great articles there. So if you still feel like this edge thing is a little murky, that is a phenomenal read. It's the Doppler report on HPE.com.
Tanya, how about for you?
Intel.com. Can't get any easier than that.
Dennis, Tanya, thank you both so much for sharing with us how partners have a unique opportunity to grow at the edge with HPE and Intel. And thank you at home for joining our webinar, Selling at the Edge with HPE. Once again, I'm Katie Bavoso. Thanks for watching.